What happens when an art critic digs in their heels and holds the exact same line for 20 years, but against two totally different enemies? That's what we're diving into today. The incredibly consistent worldview of critic Miles Mathis as he takes on challenges to the very idea of art, first in a philosophical debate from 2005 and now in a technological one today.
It really all boils down to this one simple question. It was the title of a book that kicked off our critics' first big defense, and it's the same question that's haunting us now with all this talk about AI. What is art even for? And maybe more to the point, who gets to decide? All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. We'll start with this big question of art's value, then get into the case against something called anti-elitism. After that, we're going to jump ahead in time to the whole man versus machine debate, pull all his ideas together into one doctrine, and wrap up with a huge question about, well, what happens now? So, this whole 20-year intellectual fight is really captured in two key pieces from Miles Mathis. The first is this fiery book review he wrote way back in 2005. And the second is a blistering takedown of AI art from just last year. And when you put them together, they tell a really fascinating story. Okay, so let's hop in our time machine and go all the way back to 2005. The opponent here, it isn't a robot. It's a person. A guy named John Carey, an Oxford professor and a pretty big deal art critic who had just published a book that was basically trying to tear down the whole idea of high art.
Carey's book was called What Good Are the Arts? And man, it was a full-on assault on what he considered artistic snobbery. His whole argument was that we should trust the common sensibility, and that this whole idea of some art being better or more important than other art is just plain wrong. And this is the argument that Miles Mathis set out to, as he put it, destroy.
So here's Mathis's opening salvo, and it's a real curveball. He basically says that Carey isn't some brave outsider fighting the man. Nope, he says this anti-elitist idea is the man. That Carey's supposedly radical take is actually the most mainstream establishment opinion you could possibly have in the modern art world.
Mathis then just lays out what he sees as Carey's totally flawed logic. He paints it as this five-step trip-up, a bumpy rush to a foregone conclusion. It all starts with a pretty reasonable observation. Yeah, some artists are snobs. But then it just leaps and leaps to this wild conclusion that we have to throw out all artistic standards. Mathis pretty much calls it foolish thinking.
And this is where things get really, really heated. Mathis zooms in on what is easily Carey's most extreme claim, that the belief in high art as something special or sacred is somehow philosophically connected to the kind of thinking that leads to terrorism and mass murder. I mean, wow, it's a truly shocking claim. And for Mathis, it's just completely out of bounds.
So Mathis's big counterpunch is this. You can't pin human violence on art. He argues that people are just naturally competitive. We like hierarchies. If you got rid of art and religion, we wouldn't all suddenly start holding hands. We just find something else to fight over. Politics, land, maybe even our favorite football teams. Tearing down artistic standards isn't going to make us more civilized. It's just going to change the battlefield.
Okay, now, let's hit the fast-forward button and jump ahead 2 decades. The landscape has totally changed, and a new opponent is on the scene. This time, it's not some philosopher from Oxford, it's artificial intelligence. And it poses a whole new technological threat to what art even means. And what's so striking here is how consistent his critique is. He takes the exact same principles he used to argue against Carey's philosophy and aims them squarely at the threat of AI. It's the same war for the soul of art, just with a brand new, non-human enemy.
To build his case against AI, Mathis goes right back to the fundamentals. He actually pulls up a Wikipedia definition of art, but he zeroes in on a few really important words: creative, imaginative, expression, emotional, ideas. For him, these are the words that draw a hard line in the sand between a human being and a machine.
And this comparison is really the heart of his entire argument. On one side, you've got the human artist who brings creativity, genuine emotion, and big ideas to the table. And on the other side, he defines AI generation as something totally different. It's just stealing existing art, mashing up data, and following orders. In his view, there's no soul in the machine, no imagination at all.
And that brings us to his final verdict, which is about as blunt and powerful as it gets. For Mathis, the stuff AI is churning out, it's not just bad art or a new kind of art. No, for him, it's a direct attack on the entire concept. It is, in his own words, a sin against art.
So here are the pillars of his argument. He doesn't pull any punches, right? He calls AI creation stealing and plagiarizing, plain and simple. He insists that machines can't be creative or feel emotion. He even goes after the programmers, saying they're just in it for the money, not for artistic expression. And he wraps it all up by dismissing stories of robots actually painting as just elaborate hoaxes, or as he puts it, Phoenician lies.
So now that we've looked at these two battles, fought 20 years apart, we can kind of step back and see the bigger picture. A really clear, unified philosophy starts to emerge, a whole worldview that we can basically call the Mathis doctrine on art.
This doctrine really has four main pillars. First up, distinction matters, meaning hierarchies of skill are real. And nope, not all opinions are created equal. Second, humanity is central. Real art has to come from real human emotion, real ideas, and real life experience. Third, intent is key. Why something was created, for pure expression versus just for profit, is what makes it art or not. And finally, defending standards isn't being a snob, it's just protecting a field of expertise.
So we followed this one critic's unwavering argument across 2 decades. But his rock-solid position leaves all of us in a pretty fascinating and maybe even kind of an uncomfortable spot. Where exactly do we go from here?
We've really traced this fierce, consistent defense of a totally human-centric vision of art, a vision that's been put to the test by challenges from both philosophy and technology.
And that leaves us with this massive, looming question. Mathis' two opponents, one from the world of ideas and one from the world of tech, are both pushing us toward a future where our whole idea of art could just collapse. One says anyone's opinion is valid. The other says any machine can create. So if both of those things are true, what's left of the word art? What on earth does it mean to any of us now?